Hi, good evening, everyone. I am K.S. Narayan. I welcome you all on behalf of IIT Alumni Center, Bengaluru, for the 46th webinar. We have been conducting these webinars online since the onset of the first pandemic wave in April 2020. It's been a successful series, and in case you missed it, you can find all our previous webinars on YouTube. Today we are amidst a third wave and confined to our homes. And in this context, we have a very relevant topic of importance. Today we have Mr. Sastry Subrahmanya and Mr. Sudipta Ghosh, both partners at PwC, who's going to give us all the fundas on delivery management for technology-enabled process information programs as they explore the trends in digital supply chain management. Here's a short introduction of the speakers today. Mr. Sastry Subrahmanya is a partner at PwC with over 25 years of cumulative experience, including 20 plus years in consulting, spanning business consulting and technology-driven in transformations. Mr. Sastry has worked in leading consulting organizations. He's been responsible for the delivery of consulting services in the area of ERP implementation, supply chain management strategy, and transformation initiatives. He has been associated with providing solutions for FMCG, pharmaceutical, and discrete manufacturing. Mr. Sastry comes from background of an undergraduate in mechanical engineering from Osmania University, and he has an MBA from IIM Bangalore. Joining him is Mr. Sudipta Ghosh from Mumbai, also a partner at PwC, having more than 22 years of consulting experience in the field of the data analytics. Sudipta has been a leader in data analytics and has been responsible for defining the product solution strategy, go-to-market initiatives, and incubating differentiated solutions at PwC India. Sudipta has been instrumental in successful setting up of the analytical practice at PwC, focusing around industry solutions and implementing analytical models. Sudipta has also been involved in setting up the advanced analytics propositions using AI and machine learning for the CXO suite. Sudipta is a gold medalist from IIM Calcutta and then IIT Kharagpur alumni. He's also a visiting faculty at IIM Calcutta and School of Management at IIT Kharagpur, instructing courses in business analytics and enterprise purpose management. So for today, I encourage the audience to ask questions using the Q&A box. Okay. You'll have the opportunity after an interval of 20 minutes from now, and then again at the end of the seminar. So I look forward to this interesting topic and talk. Over to you, Mr. Sastry.
Thanks, Professor Narayan. A very, very happy new year to everyone. Delighted to be on this forum along with my colleague as well as friend, Sudipta Ghosh. Both of us go back at least 20 years in consulting, working together on multiple assignments, especially in the area of supply chain and technology, combining these two. So happy to share our perspective, what we learn through our assignments, what we learn from our clients in this session. As Professor Narayan said, feel free to ask questions. At the end of first 20 minutes, we will be taking some questions, then continue with our discussion on this topic, and then further have questions later. Give me a minute. I will just share my screen so that I can also run a presentation. Would have been wonderful to meet many of you or have this discussion in person, but given the current times, I think this is the best that we can do. Just a second while I put up the presentation. I hope the presentation is visible. So Sudipta, perhaps you can confirm to me since I won't be able to listen from the others.
Yeah, it is.
Thanks, Sudipta. So what we wanted to discuss today is, as I said, a little bit of our own perspective of where we see the changes that are happening in supply chain, how are organizations responding to it, how are technologies being used to shape the supply chain strategies, how are the traditional models changing, and what does that mean for practitioners. Uh, as I said, this is a combination of our own perspective as well as the perspective that we get from doing various assignments for our clients. Let me start first by looking at saying uh, the traditional view of supply chain, or in fact, the definition of supply chain from a traditional standpoint, focused on few aspects. One was around synchronization of activities, around orchestrating processes to ensure availability of the product, material, SKU, whatever you call it, at the right location, uh, at the appropriate time, and at what you might call as appropriate cost. Now, my own personal belief is that this definition, the traditional definition, does not do justice to the critical role that supply chain plays. Supply chain function needs to be viewed as the bridge between an organization's strategy and the brand promise. Now, let me explain that with a few examples, and then we'll dig deeper into each of these aspects. Uh, let's take a few industry examples. For example, if you were to look at something like a QSR, a pizza joint, for example, which is making a promise of saying the brand promise is that the pizza will be delivered in 30 minutes, right? And the strategy is to make it available in as many locations as possible. So the business strategy could be on availability, and the brand promise is on delivery within 30 minutes. Now, if we look at the various elements of supply chain and operations, for the purpose of simplicity, I'll be using both of these a little bit interchangeably while there is a difference. Each element of your operations and supply chain has to be aligned with both your strategy as well as your brand promise. Just look at it. If the product has to be delivered in 30 minutes, the way the product is designed, in this case, would be a pizza, the time it takes for baking, the time it takes for delivery, each of these are critical elements of supply chain which have to be aligned considering your strategy as well as your brand promise. Any element that fails is a hit on one of these two. So it's important to start viewing this function as not something which is operational of saying making things available, but something that impacts, is driven by the organizational strategy and impacts the brand. I'll take a few more examples to reinforce this point. Uh, but before I get into a different one, let's look at even what has been a conversational topic for many recent years now, the tech startups. If you look at many of the startups, at least 50% of them are completely dependent on their supply chain operations for their success. What today we see as the success of e-com companies, the technology does play a very important role, but their ability to succeed is actually dependent on their supply chain operations. If there is a promise of availability, if there's a promise of a short window delivery, if it's a promise of traceability, where do these all come from? Right? If an organization is saying it's a single origin, if the brand promise is that that product, the coffee that may have or the chocolate that may eat is of single origin, right? The whole thing is driven by supply chain. So when we look at supply chain as a function, it's important to look at it from that perspective and not one of saying, okay, there is a production, there is a quality, there is the distribution. Each of these are critical elements. But it's important to look at how do we align all these, which enables our strategy and ensures that we meet what we claim as our brand promise. I would pause here for 30 seconds more to take the views of my colleague Sudipta. This is not meant as a structure of this discussion. We are looking at it as a discussion, and I would seek inputs from Sudipta as we go along, and not as a monologue of presentation. Sudipta, anything that you would think appropriate at this point, would be very happy to hear.
No, absolutely, Shastri, you're spot on. And I would just like to add a few more examples. Very recently, we heard and we saw one of the unicorns going ahead and changing their name with a promise of delivering grocery in 20 minutes. And I was just kind of going through that case study, and I then saw that they have actually made a public announcement saying that they're going to shut down certain deliveries because they may not be able to service their customers within that time frame. So you can imagine just that one single strategy that I need to deliver products or deliver my goods, fresh vegetables, fruits, etc. within that time span is absolutely fundamental to my not just strategy but my whole USP of why I exist. Uh, so that is the level of importance where supply chain has become so central to what an organization does. And I will take one more example just to add to the point which Shastri mentioned. There could be some regulatory challenges. For example, the drugs which you buy from the pharmacy, if the quality of the drug is questioned, then that's a huge reputational damage. It causes a huge amount of challenge. How do you ensure that you are able to trace the quality of that ingredient or that component to the source so that you are whatever you are promising to your customers in terms of the quality is actually being delivered. And that is another example where many pharmaceutical organizations are working overtime to figure out what kind of strategy they need to put in place for this entire track and trace of their supply chain, which is one of the critical components of their strategy. So with that, passing it back to you, Shastri, we can talk about certain additional things, as we go along. But clearly, supply chain is no longer a support function. Supply chain is no longer an agglomeration of few things, like you put in distribution, you put in production, you put in procurement in different boxes and put it all together, it becomes supply chain. It is one integrated piece for an organization and actually extremely strategic for an organization going forward.
And actually, the competition in many organizations is a competition across supply chains, which includes their suppliers, it includes the ecosystem of distributors, and does not get limited to the organizational boundaries. So when we look at some of the implications of this, as we dig deeper, these aspects would be a little more clear, and then we'll look at how our technology is impacting these. But before that, we also thought it would make sense to give a little bit perspective of how is it that COOs across the globe are looking at the function of supply chain and what are their own priority areas. PwC regularly does this survey of COOs in terms of, and this is a global survey. And here I'm sharing with you some of the results of the one that we did in 2021. 2021 is particularly important because it also marks a significant change in the way organizations have started looking at supply chain for two broad reasons. One is to do with the disruptions that have happened by virtue of COVID, and two, many technologies came into maturity and the deployment of those started. So when we asked CEOs of what are they prioritizing over the next 6 months to 1 to 2 years, we didn't look at a horizon beyond 2 years, because what is pertinent is what is going to happen immediately. Some of the areas, and then this is of importance in this conversation, is you look at it, it's demand forecasting, network optimization, transparency. While these continue to be important, there are areas which have come up in terms of priority, which include the likes of end-to-end planning, being closer to the market, supply chain integration, and towards the end, you would see things which have become very significant is around carbon footprint. Uh, Again, for different industries, the emphasis of this is slightly different, and that is to be expected. The point that is primarily to be noted here is that this is the priority areas of COOs, which for all of us as supply chain practitioners is something that we need to take away from. We'll go a little deeper into this in terms of saying what are the ones from a distribution and logistics that the firms are looking at investing. As I said, this is a global survey, and this will give you an idea of what are going to be the priority areas. The one that comes at the top is around distribution efficiency. Interestingly, what comes next is data collection technology, because organizations are realizing the importance of capturing data through the supply chain, because that is what will be used for further initiatives. Sudipta, you may want to throw some more light on this.
Absolutely. So if you see and if you do a bit of a compare and contrast between the previous slide and this slide, a slightly consistent picture will emerge out. Uh, on the previous slide, we saw demand forecasting as one of the topmost priorities, and there we also saw that the priority is very high in the first 6 months. After that, the priority dips a little, which is between 1 to 2 years. Now there is a reason why we asked people to tell us what is very important now and what is going to be important in 1 to 2 years of time. So wherever you see that there is a very high priority now, but it might kind of stabilize a little going forward, the natural conclusion there is that people are a little worried about the disruptions which is happening all around because of either the pandemic or because of the geopolitical challenges or because of other challenges. So what has come out very clearly is that if I need to drive efficiency, and here we are seeing that distribution efficiency as the most important parameter, and going forward also it will become even more important. One of the important things is that how do I ensure that I understand what is my demand, when is my demand, where is my demand. And I'm not saying that it was not important before. Demand forecasting has always been a very important aspect of the overall distribution efficiency, but it has become even more important now because the past is no longer a great indicator of the future. In the past, people could have used their experience, their gut feel, their past understanding, and could have done the forecasting and would have driven some efficiencies, and that would have been business as usual. But because of the disruption which is coming all over, it is now very critical for them to use the combination of technology and processes along with the people skills to move up in the level of maturity in that space. So you can see almost a very cohesive picture coming if I compare and contrast the two. So data collection technology is probably the enabler, if you like, for improving my overall distribution efficiency, because I will be able to do my better forecasting or better management or better visibility of my entire supply chain. So if you look at the whole thing, it kind of a story kind of emerges out. Also, what you will see on the right hand side is a bit of a deeper dive into the individual sectors where we did our research and study. And there you will find that it is not uniformly important across all sectors. Certain sectors will where distribution efficiency will be more important. Certain other sectors, your warehousing will be more important, or lean inventory or inventory management will be important. So while we are looking at it more from the perspective of all the factors, we also have to look at it from the perspective of the sector and also from the perspective of an individual organization. But it is fair to say, and it is safe to say, that you will not find anything which is outside of this slide. Whatever points are coming here, that will be relevant in some shape or form in most of the organizations.
Thanks, Sudipta, for elaborating that. What we also thought we'll spend a little while on is what are the changes that we have seen in the last 2 years, right? And what are the implications of that for SCM leaders, practitioners in organizations? There are multiple things that have happened. We distilled them down to 4 aspects which are perhaps of more importance than the rest. Are there 20 things that are changing? The answer is absolutely yes. But which are the ones that clients are most speaking of? Which is the ones that organizations are most concerned about? Are these? One is we have seen a huge uncertainty in all fluctuations, both in demand side as well as in supply side. Let's take examples of this. Last year, second wave, the demand hike in the requirements for oxygen, right, was tremendous. Was there supply? The supply was also there, but the logistics of managing these two did not happen as one would have liked it to. Right? You look at the pharmaceutical industry. There's a huge upswing in demand for certain therapeutic segments, and for many others, there was actually a significant downslide in the demand for other therapeutic segments. Supplies from China at one point, there was uncertainty around it. And if you look at the pharmaceutical industry, for example, there was a huge dependence on the APIs from China. And of course, that also led to certain policy changes within our own country in terms of incentives for API manufacturing, etc. Right? The changing geopolitical situation that has also resulted in both the manufacturing bases changing as well as the sourcing locations changing. Our own country, our own government has been campaigning, canvassing for more manufacturing to be moved to India because of the relationship that we enjoy with many other countries. There was conflict between China and Australia. Each of these meant for global supply chains, there is a shift from where they will source, where the manufacturing bases are going to be, and the whole logistics around it shifting. That's the second significant one that has happened in the last few years. The third, many technologies came to maturity and deployment of scale. There was proof of concepts, pilots that were happening over the years. But what we actually saw in the last 2 years is that these have become mainstream in many ways. And we'll speak about this as we go along in this discussion. The final one, very important one, is huge emphasis on ESG, the environment side of it, the impact that organizations are having on the carbon footprint. So if one were to distill the many changes, these are perhaps the most significant amongst the many that we would have seen. Consequently, what does it mean for practitioners and SCM leaders? The first that we have seen is supply chain resilience. This as a term has existed for decades, but the number of times that we have heard this and that becoming a boardroom topic. It was no more limited to a risk management or limited to supply chain functions. How resilient are supply chains for an organization has become a boardroom topic. Now, we'll dig a lot deeper into this particular as we go along. But what do we mean by resilience? Essentially, it's the ability to service customers irrespective of what happens to the supply chain in terms of disruptions, in terms of increased lead times, in terms of non-availability of raw materials, in terms of containment zones. If one were to go back 1.5, 2 years back, right? What goods could move from what and during the end of first wave? What material can move from what state to another state was something which was very dynamic. Within a state, a certain warehouse could have been part of a containment zone, which would mean no goods can move out of it. There are organizations which split their warehouses to multiple warehouses with the simple reason that if one of it were to be in a containment zone or if employees were to be impacted there, they are able to operate another one. If you go back a few years back during the GST, immediately after GST, you have seen actually organizations consolidate warehouses. The impact of last 2 years have been that it has got reversed in many cases from a de-risking, and those are all part of the resilience approach. The second one is ability to respond rapidly to what's changing in the market. It could be a demand fluctuation, a surge in demand, and the building block for that was seen as visibility, right? Even to be able to commit of saying if there is a surge in demand, how much am I actually able to supply? Not just looking at your stocks, your manufacturing, your raw materials, but going down to the vendor level and then saying, hey, this is what I'll be able to supply. So visibility became the building block. The third is while technologies got adopted elsewhere, in supply chain, we have seen an increased adoption of multiple kinds. And that's something that we will spend a little more time on. And finally, supply chain leaders can no longer ignore the idea of sustainable supply chains, right? It's not about just being running it optimally. It is not just about being super efficient. The core idea of sustainability is getting embedded, which goes beyond reporting. 4 years back, the emphasis was on only the footprint, reporting on the footprint. Today, it is saying even if it means a little higher cost, how can I reduce my overall carbon footprint? Now, what we thought we will do is pick up a couple of these, right? Especially around the resilience side, around the visibility side, and to some extent even on the sustainability side. Dig deeper into each of these, and then we will look at the broader areas of saying what are the technologies which are emerging, how are they impacting, and therefore why are we using this phrase of digital supply chain. Before we do that, what we will do is, perhaps I see a couple of questions coming up in the Q&A one. We'll first take those questions and then continue on this theme. Actually, there are multiple interesting ones which are coming up. I'll take a couple of them. Let me read out the first one. Today in India, there are so many startups all chasing the same area of last mile delivery, which is a big element in supply chain. Is there really so much scope for so many entities focusing singularly on this area? It's a brilliant question. We have to look at it in two parts. One, is there a need? And second, is there a scope for so many players? The first one, the answer is yes. For the focus that is required in last mile. Because when you look at the urban, you'll have a certain answer. When you look at the semi-urban, there's a different answer. When you actually go down to tier 2, tier 3 cities, and then to the next level, you'll realize that the last mile connectivity there is nowhere near what it needs to be. The emphasis on the last mile connectivity has largely been in tier 1 cities because of the potential there. Right? So many players, possibly there could be a shake-up, but more likely it could also mean that multiple people ride on the same infrastructure. Let me give you an example of that. Go back to some of the delivery ones. If one were to look at 3 years back, there were individual organizations which were managing their own distribution. Today, there are aggregators which do the distribution for a set of organizations. If, for example, you are speaking of a Dunzo, you are speaking of a Swiggy, look at a QSR like Domino's 2-3 years back, or a Pizza Hut. They would do their own delivery. Today, you have the aggregators who are doing it for multiple. So what I'm saying is this, there is a possibility that the role of these aggregators, which become the single ones for doing the last mile, is going to be there. That is in the urban. In the rural, we'll have to wait and watch how these models evolve. There is another question that's come up. With new distribution channels getting into play and seen competing with traditional ones, all at different life cycle stages, what can be defined as a level playing field? Or can there be a level playing field? This is in context of recent distributors standoff with companies like HUL, Nestle, etc. I suspect you are referring to the channel conflict that is going to happen. Sudipta, would be keen to hear your views on this.
Yeah. So I will kind of link this question with what you may have seen in the study which we did. So one of the things which came out very clearly in the COO survey, that organizations, and by the way, the COO survey was for the manufacturers, so to say, was that they are proactively looking at different channels to reach out to their customers. I'll give you one example. I was talking to a CFO of a cement manufacturing company, and what he was sharing with me, was the fact that cement is a commodity, and typically the distribution happens through a dealer, and then the dealer will be selling it to the builders or other retailers. So your primary interaction is with the dealers. However, typically because it is a commodity, they will be governed by what price or what price discounts you are giving, as opposed to anything else. So you don't have much of a lever apart from just the pricing to either improve your market share or to increase your reach and all of that. And the interesting concept over there was that if I am able to understand the end use of my product, and in this case I'm talking about cement, and if I have a different kind of a specialty cement which can provide the same strength but in a smaller volume, then that could be of immense value to a builder, because the columns which they are building, which is taking up the floor space, if the length and breadth of the column can be reduced without sacrificing the structural strength of the building, then the premium the person pays for that cement would be far lower than the benefit that builder will get, because that additional free space which will be available, or the carpet area will be available for that organization to sell and market, right? So nobody's thinking around those lines, simply because a cement manufacturing company is very dissociated with the end consumer, in this case somebody who's like using it for constructing a building, right? Now it is not difficult to make that connect if you are able to use a digital channel to directly reach out to your end consumers and understand what your product is being used for, right? And that is what is going to create the tension, as we have rightly articulated, the level playing field. Who knows? I mean, level playing field from the perspective of whether it is a dealer or whether it's a manufacturer will be different. But this tension is going to further intensify. Well, this tension was always there, but now this tension will further intensify because the manufacturers now have an ability to reach out to the end consumer directly through the digital channels. And hence, you will find either a consolidation or you will find multiple channels coexisting. But this is going to be an extremely critical area for every organization to explore, because they are looking at this diversity in their different channels for improving the reach, for improving their, or even increasing or premiumization of their services, or even I would say that if you cannot differentiate on the product, you better differentiate on the service or the aftermarket. And how do you do that using digital channels is going to be a key way, because that's how you are going to build loyalty to your end consumers. So we will see a very interesting dynamic coming up going forward. And I would not say a standoff, so to say. Maybe there would be that back and forth, and you will have to live in that ecosystem where it is a combination of managing the conflict. It is also a little bit of a co-opetition as well, and it is also a lot of innovation. But at the end of the day, all of this will ultimately benefit the end consumer, hopefully, and the most efficient one will probably stay in the race. So that's how I would kind of take the question. Yes.
Thanks, Sudipta. There's a very interesting question that's come up, which is what are some of the core skills that are expected from SCM professionals to be future ready? What changes do we see from the past? So there's a very interesting question coming in, and I'll answer this from two perspectives. One, if you look at many organizations, they don't have the structure of saying a supply chain SCM head. Some organizations which have brought in the recent past is typically a procurement head who has become the SCM head. Not all organizations even have an identified role as an SCM head. Typically, it has been somebody who is managing distribution, production, or the sales and operations planning, who gets elevated to that role. And many a times, the procurement head or the logistics head is called the SCM head. So structurally, we are actually seeing that most MNCs have started putting SCM head as a formal role, both globally as well as in India. It'll take perhaps a little more while for the same to happen in many of the Indian companies, but some of them have adopted that in the recent years. Coming to the skills that are required, one to be future ready, and second, I would also to be ready for the current, right? Uh, I would put this in the hard skills, the technology skills, and the soft skills. The soft skills are super important because this is a function that will need to collaborate across multiple areas, including finance, marketing, sales, and work with vendors as well as distributors. Uh, Coming to the hard skills, uh, technology skills are becoming more and more important, right? The ability to analyze data, ability to understand insights, ability to look at deploying new technologies. That's one side of it. The second side of it is the functional skills itself, because many come from the traditional, as I said, one of the areas of supply chain, ability to understand the functions. Many of these are driven by a certain level of algorithms as well. Right? For example, if one were to look at demand planning, there's a lot of sophistication in the algorithms that are available today. And your belief in the algorithms is just about as much as your understanding of the same is. This cannot be as black box. Similarly, when you look at scheduling, ability to understand those, optimization, those are skills that certainly are required. Supply chain is also about orchestrating the ecosystem partners, right? It's about building that collaboration with your channel partners as well as your vendors. So the core conceptual skills, the algorithmic understanding, technology, and the soft skills. All these four are critical, not to be future ready, but even to be ready for the current complexity itself. One final point here, supply chain is about handling two things, trade-offs and uncertainty. Ability to assess the uncertainty and taking the call on the trade-off. Let me explain that a little more. Most supply chain decisions are a trade-off decisions. Do I hold higher inventories or look at the risk of lower service levels? Do I pay more and get something available immediately, or do I wait, or do I hedge? Right? Most supply chain critical decisions tend to be one of trade-off. So developing the analytical capabilities to take the right trade-off decisions is going to be crucial. I hope that answers the question. This is a topic of personal interest to me because this is something that I believe that is crucial for many of our manufacturing and distribution intensive organizations. There are a few more questions. What we will do is we will take this up after another 30 minutes. We thought we will do first a 20-25 minute session, take a few questions, and then proceed with some more of our own presentation and then come back to the questions. I will go back to the presentation. As I said before we took the Q&A, there are three areas that we will dig deeper into. One of it being around supply chain resilience. So what we thought we'll do is combine the concept of resilience with also how some of the technologies are being used, and these are some of the assignments that we have done. This is not something that's futuristic. It is something that we have done during COVID for organizations, looking at assessing the risks, which has broadly three elements, right? The first is you anticipate what can possibly go wrong or what can possibly change. Second, you look at assessing what will happen if such an event were to occur. And third is develop mitigation or act and adopt kind of mechanisms. When we are speaking of anticipating risks, this can be along multiple dimensions, right? It could be around saying what happens if my vendor lead times increase. And did we see this happen? Absolutely yes, in the phase one of COVID. What happens if there are supplier disruptions? What happens if the transit time for goods movement increases? What happens if there is a sudden surge in demand? How much can my owe? And what happens when all of these happen simultaneously to various extent? For example, if I were to say that my lead time increases by 20%, my demand goes up by 30%, and the transit time, variability in transit time is also increasing, how will the whole system behave, right? Now, what we did for organizations is ran hundreds and thousands of simulations to look at saying in what range is the current supply chain able to absorb what nature of shocks or deviations. What's interesting is when we do this exercise, before the exercise, when we ask the practitioners how much absorption is possible, there is a gut feeling with which certain numbers are given. When you actually run the simulation, you find a huge deviation. What does this point to? It points to actually saying the resilience could be more or less, but it is not quantified, it is not understood as much by managers as it's required. And why is that so? We operated for many years in a fairly stable, predictable world. Uh, in the last few years, that has changed significantly. So this is one area where we have seen it's of immense utility to supply chain practitioners so that they're able to go back to the CEO, go back to questions from the board in terms of saying how resilient is our supply chain to the things that are happening, right? Uh, I've had conversations with organizations where they said the budgets that were drawn at the beginning of the year made no sense 3 months into the year. Uh, they had to recast the whole thing and they had to do multiple scenario planning for it. Now, how do you do this multiple scenario planning? And then simulation is one of the techniques that we had used for it. Interestingly, apart from the impact that came out of the simulation itself, these throughout other what I might call as significant other benefits, right? In terms of generating synthetic data with which a lot more of advanced algorithms could be used. Sudipta, you may share your experience on that as well.
Absolutely. So, what happens typically is that if you ask an organization just to become resilient, if there is any shock in the supply chain or any part of the overall organization, the first challenge which an organization faces is where is the historical data? How am I going to actually figure out what models I need to build or what predictive algorithms I need to build? Because for any predictive algorithm or model to build, you need some historical data. And by its very nature, these shocks or disruptions do not have a historical precedent. Even nobody knew 1 month back that there will be such a huge surge of Omicron now, right? It was simply, it was just going business as usual. And if you are running an airlines company, suddenly from a peak of what you saw during the Christmas or prior to the Christmas, now coming into the new year, the number of cancellations have gone up, or number of people who are traveling by air has significantly come down. And that could not have been predicted, right? So you have two problems. One is that you cannot predict when is the next disruption which is going to happen. Secondly, even if you can, you don't really have any data as to how you will be able to behave in that scenario. So the second best alternative for that, for lack of real data, is to generate data, which is what Sastry was alluding to, which is synthetic data, not real data, synthetically generated data, which is possibly as close to a real data as possible. And how is that going to happen? That is going to happen if you're going to create a digital replica or a digital twin of your processes, of your supply chain, and your ability to build that digital replica is going to be very critical for you to then generate the impact of these disruptions on your outputs. For example, if I'm looking at a supply chain, I can see that there are two things which are very important for me. Maybe one is my service level to my customers, and second could be my working capital costs, which is my inventory carrying costs and distribution costs, right? And there is a trade-off between the two, which Sastry was saying, that whether you increase your service levels and increase your costs, or you reduce your cost and there could be a impact on your service. It's all a question of trade-off, and that's what we do in the real world. So if you have created a digital twin of your entire supply chain, and in this case we probably used a discrete event-based processing model where we had individual nodes in the supply chain, where each node will have a supply coming in with a particular lead time, something getting processed or something getting stored, and then something getting shipped out depend on a demand pattern which it kind of is supposed to deliver to. And when you do that and you bring in all the elements of probability, stochasticity, and then you bring in some disruption that suppose a particular supplier cannot supply certain things, or there is a sudden spike or a sudden drop in the demand, or there is a challenge of the logistics, you include those parameters, or you kind of incorporate those parameters in the initial conditions and then the shocks in the digital twin, which is a low cost way to do that. Then you are gathering a lot of output data, as in you are gathering information about your service levels, you're gathering data about your inventory positions at every stocking point in the supply chain during the entire simulation run. So for example, if you're doing a simulation run for 1 year, you have got 1 year worth of data, very rich data, although everything is synthetic, but very rich data, which tells you the impact of all these changes in your external environment in terms of how you are going to serve your customers or what your internal costs are going to be. Now that is then the starting point for you to do a lot of rich analysis, and then you can build models, and you can build models to do two things. The first thing is that you can figure out where are the bottlenecks, or what we call as the choke points in the supply chain. And by choke points in the supply chain, we mean that suppose I increase the demand significantly, then where am I going to get choked? And because of that constraint, I'm not able to significantly improve or increase my production, and I need to do something different. Now, you may be able to understand that intuitively, but you may be surprised that when you do a data-driven exercise, certain new things will come up which you may never have thought before. So a lot of organizations, and we are also helping the organizations to do that, is looking at the synthetic data to drive AI-based models, which can look at this cause and effect relationship between a disruption and the output. They are using the data to figure out where are my vulnerabilities and choke points in the supply chain in a very, very data-driven manner. And then that becomes an input for you to take some decisions related to your investment or capital expenditure type of investment, long-term investment in your entire supply chain, where you need to build a redundancy in the supply chain, where you need to have a fallback mechanism for your suppliers and all that, right? So, so that is a very, very new field and a very rich field where you are combining the techniques of simulation along with the techniques of AI and combining the two together to deal with the uncertainty which you are facing in an organization. And when we talk about the green supply chain or the sustainable supply chain, I will also introduce the concept of a carbon footprint also, which can be simulated in this model. Because if you are going for a net zero declaration of your organization, you also need to create some what if models or some scenarios, and that you may not be able to do unless you have some kind of a digital replica of the supply chain. So that's a very interesting aspect of a data driven decision making in the context of building resilience in the supply chain.
The other one that this is certainly something that we found very interesting when working with clients. The other area that there's been a lot of interest and the initial steps have been taken by many organizations is to enhance the visibility. Visibility was something that we always spoke of saying one needs to have visibility of what the inventory positions are, where the trucks are, where the goods are. But when you look at it from beyond the organizational boundaries and are able to integrate the whole thing, then the concept of the supply chain control tower comes in. It's not just about visibility, it's also about the appropriate alerts, about sensing what's happening at various points of the supply chain, bubbling it up to the right people to take the decisions, assisting them in taking the decisions, right? This as a concept has started taking off in the last, I would say, 1 to 1.5 years. There is substantial work that Sudipta has personally done in this space. So I would actually defer it to him to give an insight into what's happening in this space. But let me tell that
the definition of this itself has been evolving over the last 2-3 years. If one were to ask what is the supply chain control tower 3 years back, and one were to ask 1 year back, it's evolved a lot. It's the elements of intelligence have come in, the elements of proactive demand sensing has come in, the elements of decision support beyond what used to be only an end-to-end knowing what is happening where has come in. Back to you on this, Sudipta. This
Sure,
transformation.
absolutely. Yeah, so I'll give some examples, and that's probably the best way to articulate what we are trying to do here. So one example which comes to my mind is this entire challenge around slow moving inventory, which we were dealing with in one particular assignment. And this was again for an organization where although there were some shortage of few products, which obviously meant that the inventory was moving very fast, there were also a large number of SKUs where the inventory was getting obsolete or was on the verge of getting obsolete, and there was an expiry date, etc., which means that beyond that date you just have to throw it away. This is of no use to anybody in the organization. So the challenge which that organization faced was that first of all there was an inability to identify 3 months down the line which particular SKUs will come under the category of a slow moving level, because you have not been able to forecast the demand and link it back with the production and the supply. So even if the demand is probably high, if your operations or production is much more than that, then you are just anyways building up the inventory and you are not able to clear it off in a short span of time. Or your demand has actually gone down, but you are continuously doing the procurement of your raw material, and in order to ensure that your capacity utilization of your machinery is there, because that is the KRA of somebody in the production department, you have not stopped the production, you are continuing with the production, only to end up with a large number of FG SKUs which are not being sold at that rate, right? So so this was all a question of a bit of a disconnect between what is happening on the demand side to what is happening on the production and the procurement side. So the starting point of that was if there is a way to link the flow of the information between the different departments when they need it. It is no use saying post facto that you have a slow moving inventory, but it is of tremendous use or help if you can tell that, by the way, 3 months down the line, this is the problem you are going to have. So the forward looking view that you are going to end up with a stock, or you are going to end up with a stock out situation, is far more critical and important, which needs a joint up view between the demand forecast, between the distribution plan, the production plan, and the procurement plan, and plan plus actuals also, because as you are moving along, you are also looking at the actual data coming in from these different parts. So the starting point was to link all this up, and then to create models which will tell you that what is going to happen going forward. That was the first part of the puzzle. The second part of the puzzle which we were trying to solve here is that the entire planning exercise, when you are doing the planning, what factors do you take into account when you do the planning, and how dynamic is your plan? So in this case, what we wanted to do was to impress on the client that your plan will need to change if there is a change in either the supply or the demand situation, if not on a real-time basis, at least on a daily or on a weekly basis. And that is very important. What is going to be very critical is that you don't create a plan at the beginning of the month which you blindly follow for the whole month, because a lot of things can happen in between a month which you then need to change, and it will depend from a organization to organization. So we are talking about a very responsive way of changing the plan itself in a dynamic way, so that you have got a full grip and control of what is happening across the board. So that was the second aspect of it. The third aspect, and this is something which I would, it was a great, experience across, was that there are a lot of decisions which need to be taken at every point in time. For example, you need to take a decision whether you need to supply a particular SKU from one distribution center to another distribution center because there is a stock out there or there is an excess inventory here. You need to take a decision at what price you need to buy a specific raw material. Sometimes you may even buy at a higher price simply because there is a stock out like situation. Sometimes you may postpone the buying because your working capital has gone up. So there are a lot of micro decisions which needs to be taken almost on a daily basis by a different set of people in the organization. And sometimes if these people are not taking decisions in sync or in coordination, then it becomes a bit of a challenge. So what we devised and what we want to do with this construct here is that, can we automate part of that decision making? We call it a cognitive automation. So here it is not about process automation, it is about automation of the decision making aspect or decision making part of a human being, using a set of rules or algorithms or any other mechanism, sometimes even heuristics, and embedding that in the supply chain, right? So almost imagine that when in the last slide I spoke about the digital twin, right? And in this slide I'm talking about an automation of the supply of the actions. So if I have a digital twin, which is nothing but a digital replica, and I'm able to automate my actionables from there, I can almost run my digital twin parallel to my physical chain. And if I feel very satisfied that my algorithms are giving me better results than what I would do if I take my decisions in a manual way, then that is something which I would like to incorporate back into my real or physical supply chain, and then use those algorithms to automate not just the process but also the decision making capability. So here we are talking about the prescriptive tools which will take those individual micro decisions and ensure that you have an end-to-end ability to control your whole enterprise and the complexity of the supply chain.
So we were speaking of this some time back, with the key element here that you mentioned of aligning the micro decisions or synchronizing them. The benefits of it are huge. Have seen organizations where there's a launch of a new product, but the same is delayed because there is existing printing packaging material which belongs, which needs to be changed for the new product, right? Uh, uh, these decisions have not got synchronized. Either there is a material wastage or there is a delay in the launch itself. Uh, Organizations which look at saying, what's the cost of a promotion, right? Uh, that decision is many a times taken independent of the cost for supply chain on it. Ability to assess that cost becomes very important when you want to do a promotion, because the uptake and the margin that happens and the cost, how do you weigh these, right? All of these have the control tower, the simulation, all these help in taking these decisions. In the interest of time, I'll also move to the next one, which is around the impact on the ESG area. This is something which was always important but has come to the fore. Why do I say it was always important? If we had paid enough attention to this in the past, maybe we would have been in a better state as far as carbon emissions are concerned. Today, investors, when they are investing in organizations, are looking at this. It's not just a nice to have, but it's an imperative for organizations, even if they want to attract the appropriate funds from the right investors. Most organizations, I wouldn't say most, many of them have committed to reducing the emissions. Now, how do you do this? The most critical role for any organization is completely on the supply chain, right? Earlier, the model was built around optimizing the costs alone. Going forward, we see this changing dramatically with reducing the overall footprint. We know organizations which are redesigning their containers, their even the shipping liners, right, to reduce the impact. That's the scale of redesign that's happening. Uh, Already we know that at the packaging material level, uh, we know that some products are being even phased out. Organizations are publicly stating the products that they will phase out to make the business a lot more sustainable. Uh, Amongst all functions in an organization, supply chain will have the maximum importance when it comes to this. And going back to the question that was asked of the various capabilities, an understanding and a sensitiveness to this area is one another capability that SCM leaders need to have. So these were three topics that we wanted to deep dive. And I will now go into a broader spectrum of areas which are the technologies which are impacting supply chain and how are these exactly impacting the supply chain strategies. Broadly, these list some of the areas. For example, we spoke a little bit of AI, sensors, IoT. Now practically every shop floor, there's a conversation of saying, where should the IoTs be put? Where should the sensors be put within the product, right? If you look at a tire company, for example, they speak of saying, can I make a tire as a service? And I bill based on the number of kilometers used. That would require a different kind of sensors to be embedded in tires which work on very harsh working conditions. 3D printing, and I will go into the detail of how are these influencing the respective supply chain strategies. Blockchain for not just for traceability but also for authentication. There's a lot that's happening on the fraud detection, authentication in very high-end luxury products as well as in critical areas like pharmaceuticals. And if you look at in our own country, the extent of spurious drugs in pharmaceutical, the estimates vary anything from 12% to 28%. Imagine the impact of that on patient healthcare. Right? If we are saying 25, 28% of the medication that's received is actually spurious. Right? We will look at how are these impacting our supply chain strategies. Let's go back of saying what were the traditional supply chain strategies. Take, for example, postponement, right? It's a classic strategy that most companies have, many companies have embarked on. Perhaps the most known example of that is that of Asian Paints when they brought in the tinting capabilities, so that the number of SKUs can be huge without the previous stage being as much in numbers, right? Similarly, earlier the forecasting and demand planning, transportation. If you look at each of these as supply chain strategies that are employed, and then look at which are the technologies that are impacting, you can actually significantly enhance your strategy by these. 3D printing and analytics is, for example, is a technology that you could use for enhancing your postponement strategy. Forecasting and demand planning, smart devices for demand sensing and inventory positioning. There are organizations that we have worked with, which a chemicals company which looks at where the chemical is going into an FMCG, looks at the offtake of the FMCG, has sensors there, and then drives its own demand based on that. So it is not secondary, tertiary sales of their products, but the vendors are starting to use these 2 levels, 3 levels down the supply chain to be able to not just predict their demand, but also to be a lot more responsive. If you look at what's happened in the transport segment, the question that many B2B organizations ask is, if for a 200 rupee
or a 100 rupee parcel, I can trace where it is. Why is it that when I'm placing an order that runs into crores of rupees, I do not know where it is in manufacturing, where it is in the shipment, when exactly will it get delivered, right? So, and then today that's all possible. And those investments have started happening so that I, as a manufacturer, know what stage of manufacturing my raw material or the components are, and that will help my own planning, right? So each of the strategies of supply chain, which were traditionally used, can be significantly enhanced by using a set of these technologies. I have not covered all of them here. It was more to give a glimpse of how do you start looking at technologies. Typically, there are two approaches. One approach is to say, I have a problem, and then say, what's the solution that I look at? Another, which is what I have seen in the more recent past, is to say, hey, I have these technologies. There are these possibilities that these can be used for. And therefore, what problem can I not just solve, but perhaps completely change the way of working by using these? Can I bypass the whole problem statement itself by using these technologies? Uh, I will go on to the next slide from here. Shifting gears into how is it that organizations should start embarking on this? The idea was to give a brief of what is it that's happening, and then look at saying if one were to embark on this journey, what are the first steps that we would do? In our view, the very first step is to assess where you are with respect to your digital supply chain maturity. Right? When we are speaking of digital supply chain maturity, we are speaking of saying, how are you using your technologies across each of the sub-functions, right, of supply chain, and how effectively are you using these? Do you see potential for that? Where are you with respect to being a champion in this space? Any improvement starts with current state assessment. So what we normally recommend is to start off saying, where are you on your current maturity scale? That sets the foundation in terms of where you can be. When we do our annual survey, the one that we started off this presentation with COO, we find that the returns that digital champions get on multiple dimensions and then the metrics on the supply chain parameters are significantly better than those that you would call not falling into that category. There could be the digital novice or perhaps even ahead of that, before that stage. So there is merit in investing in this because the impact that you see on your supply chain parameters and your KPIs and thereby reflecting on your organizational measures is significant. Sudipta, want to add anything to this?
Yeah, so I think if you are looking at the maturity in your organization, a few important things I would just like to call out. One is that um, sometimes the very fact that you are trying to understand the maturity also throws up a number of blind spots. This is what we have seen. Many organizations undertake this exercise not to go to the digital champion level straight away, but effectively to find out where they are, and the journey itself gives them a lot of areas where they need to look at it in a fairly structured manner. The second thing here is that uh, you know because we have done a number of survey, there is also a possibility for us to figure out that what is best in class, and for that specific process or for that specific sector. So you have got something to look up to in terms of what are the good practices which can be followed in each of these areas, and that is something which you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can learn on the back of what others have done. And the third part is the increasing realization that collaboration is something which is going to be more and more important, which is why we have kept vertical integrator as 3 and horizontal collaborator as 4, because we feel that in a fairly complex supply chain, in some cases you may want to do a vertical integration, but in many other cases you may actually be better off by creating that ecosystem, and ecosystem across all aspects of your supply chain, right from the product development to research to the operating model to customers and everything else. So that is something which many organizations are coming to us. In fact, one specific example which I can call out is that organizations are coming to us and saying that, well, we know that everything cannot be solved by my ERP technologies or my CRM solutions or my other optimization solutions. I might want to have a lot of point solutions in my entire supply chain, which might mean that I might have to work with a number of small boutique firms or small startups or other organizations. And how do I actually figure out where can I plug in those specific point solutions without disturbing the integrity of my supply chain or without disturbing the overall vision which I have, so that people don't start doing things on their own, but there is a method in the madness. And hence this kind of an exercise helps to structure that ability to have a more ground up view of what innovation you want to do at specific areas and specific points in the supply chain.
Thanks, Sudipta. I will now move to one final topic. Having spoken of these, I recall there was a question on what capabilities do individuals who are practitioners of supply chain need to gain. What I want to spend a little while before we go into the final Q&A on this topic is what capabilities do organizations need to develop to play this game. Right? While the maturity would give an idea of where we stand, there are 4 dimensions or critical aspects that organizations need to look at from building the capabilities. One is the enabling technologies itself. I'm not saying that organizations need to have these built into themselves. They can even take help from outside, but an understanding of the foundational technologies, be it around AI, ML, IoT, how do we use sensors, right? Blockchain, where if it's applicable in certain context, right? Get a clear understanding of, and then this understanding has to be by the functional people. It's not necessarily the technology team in the organization, but the functional people who needs to have, because it's only when you have an understanding of these technologies, how they work and what their limitations are, you are able to take a bet on which of these you want to deploy. Right? No organization has endless resources, so you'll need to take a few bet on which of these for what context do you want to deploy. The second is looking at the deployment stages. What does that mean? They may want to start off with some technologies as a proof of concept to see where will you, where can it be applicable. Some you may want to deploy to scale depending on the maturity of it, right? So it's always a good idea to have a portfolio of these. Something is not ready today, but unless you start experimenting on it, you may not be ready. You may not be able to utilize it when it's mature or has got adopted 2 years, 3 years down the line. Some of them may fall off the way, right? Today you may say I will embark on AR, VR for my use it for my preventive maintenance. Depending on your context, it may be very successful, or you may say, hey, it's not so useful here, but it's very useful in my R&D. How will you get a feel of it unless you start deploying it, doing the POCs? So some of the nascent technologies you may want to pilot with, some you want to do POC, and some which are stable, you may want to scale it up.
Right? That's the second aspect, that you need to have the appetite to be able and the capabilities to be running these multiple projects. The third is the methodology capabilities. The way these projects are run are very different from the way they were run 5 years back or 10 years back. The methods that are used, the agile ones, DevOps, even the methods of, let's say, design thinking, where you're looking at what is the art of possible for a specific problem case. You need to build the methodology capabilities in the organization. The final one, which is super important, is about ecosystem leverage. Many of these are possible only by orchestrating collaboration across the service providers or partners. It is not possible for you to say, I will do a blockchain all by myself, right? If you also look at the reason, for example, why it's taken off in some sectors like government, because government is able to mandate every player in the ecosystem to adopt it. Unless you are able to collaborate and ensure that the other players are onboarded, some of these may not be possible. With significant emphasis that's also happening in collaboration, this is going to be super important. This also links back to the previous question that we saw of channel conflict, right? When you are trying to do, for example, a direct to customer, it is going to create a channel conflict. How do you manage your partners? How do you work with them while you are creating a parallel stream of service or product server delivery to your end customers? So these are the 4 aspects that are crucial. The subsequent slides actually speak a little more in detail on each of these. I would, in the interest of time, stop here and be happy to take questions around these. If there are any comments from you, Sudipta, will add that we get into the questions.
Yeah, I think we can get into the questions, because a couple of questions, or at least a few more questions, have come in the meantime. So I think the first question there is, how do organizations build effective feedback loops along the SCM value chain, and what are some of the trends we are seeing in this area? So great question. When we kind of were talking about both the digital twin as well as the control tower examples, the central or the fundamental point was that you have a closed loop analysis, as in somebody at one end of the chain is able to see what is happening at the other end, and it doesn't just happen at a planning level. Even after the plan period and when the actual data has started coming in, you bring the actual data back into the plan and see what has been your variance or deviation, and you accordingly prepare your I would say next day's forecast, or next it's almost like a rolling forecast which you prepare. So that is something which is extremely fundamental. The feedback loop is very critical, because without that you really do not know where you are heading towards. So there's a without that any kind of machine learning model is not possible. Whenever we talk about the AI or the machine learning based models, the underlying assumption is that there is a closed feedback loop. The output is again fed back as an input in terms of refining our understanding and algorithm of the whole process itself. So you're absolutely right. I think the trends in these areas are end-to-end visibility, integrated planning, the machine learning based models which help you to constantly do course correction. I'll take just one example of the closed loop, and that is the forecasting. We have spoken about demand forecast a lot in the past, and we have seen that that trend is also there in terms of people focusing on demand forecast in a big way. Now, I can tell you for sure that if you do not have a closed loop or a feedback loop, the demand forecasting model can go completely off in a very short span of time. Whether you are using an exponential smoothing based model, or you're using more a curve fitting or a ML based model for forecasting of demand, all models by and large definitely look at the actual data in addition to the planned data and plug it back into the model to improve the accuracy of the forecast. So we would see that feedback loops going to be extremely critical and important across the board. Shastri, any other thoughts on that specific
No,
question on feedback loop?
that's perfect, Sudipta. And I think demand planning feedback is a very, very good example of how the feedback gets closed on in that area. Uh, if I were to move to the next question, I see maturity being redefined from process excellence to become digital. How can traditional organizations that are generally low on digital usage compete with the digital natives? It's a very interesting question. I'll attempt to answer this. There are no easy answers to this. The first thing is the traditional ones uh, have significant strengths in their supply chain, distribution, in the channel control that they have, etc. Uh, we got to recognize that strength. The biggest struggle that digital natives have is in that space, that they do not have the equivalent of the traditional ones. Having said that, uh, what am seeing some of the traditional organizations do is, one, try and collaborate with people who have these capabilities. Two, start off completely different uh, sub business unit which can compete with the digital natives. Why so? Because the culture, everything that they are going to set up there is very, very different from because making a business model transformation is not so easy. So they retain the existing and create a new entity for focusing on the digital kind of business. Uh, the third is to partner with these. So these are some of the methods that I have seen. I wouldn't claim to have an expertise in this because that falls more into the strategy realm than into the supply chain. But these are the three things that I have seen. Uh, One is partner with technology players. Second is to create a separate business unit because they are struggling to imbibe that in the main businesses because it requires significant change in the ways of working, right? And then third is to collaborate or create joint ventures in that space, right? The third one is more around joint ventures. Having said that, I would go back to my first point. While the digital one is super important, let's not ignore the strengths that the traditional companies have built, be it in manufacturing, be it in control of the supply side or on the channels. All of these are critical for success. So the combination is what will ensure the combination of having the digital abilities as well as the traditional strengths, while the digital natives are struggling on the first one. There are more questions pouring in.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether I'll be able to answer all of them. Perhaps the next one you can take up, Sudipta.
Yes. So I think the question is around the fact that how do startups get into partnerships with larger companies as clients, not only as point solutions? Can there be an engagement strategy beyond ERP, especially advanced analytics, especially without references? Interesting one again. We are clearly seeing that whether it's a point solution or it's an integrated solution, ERP will not be the answer to every problem, and there would be a need to have what we call as the core part, which is going to be an ERP or a CRM, and then there will be other peripherals around the core, which will be required for an organization to function, and that's going to be a fact of the going to be a reality. So I think the way is that if and it is not only that startups are wanting to work with large organizations, it's actually the large organizations also are wanting to create an ecosystem of partners with whom they can work in a more sustainable way. So the way will be to possibly focus more on the end outcome or the end benefit for the whole ecosystem, and work backwards from there, as opposed to trying to say that, well, I'm implementing a solution. And that's what I've seen work out a lot. And maybe Shastri, you can kind of share from your experience that organizations generally would like to see what is the impact, what is the outcome we are trying to deliver, as opposed to building a lot of sophisticated technologies or implementing number of solutions, which may be very good, but their impact is not easily understood or communicated or felt or delivered. So from a startup point of view, the focus could be more on looking at how is it actually going to solve a specific problem, and then work backwards from there.
I completely agree with you, Sudipta. At the end of the day, what problem are we solving and what impact is that creating for the organization? There are a series of questions that I've poured in. I think we'll have to figure out a way of addressing this. Certainly not something that we'll be able to do in this session. Perhaps we should have cut down our presentation a little bit. That's the wisdom of hindsight to be able to address this. Given the time constraint, I would hand it over to Dr. Sushila, and we'll figure out a way of addressing these questions. There are at least 10 of these unaddressed, Sudipta.
Yeah.
Sushila, over to you. I will stop sharing.
Yeah, I think it is already stopped. So maybe while Sushila comes up, maybe I'll take up one question real quick. Oh yeah, Sushila, you're there.
No, please go ahead and take one more question.
Happy to. Go ahead, Sudipta.
So one question was, so one question was on the digital twin. Is that how do you go about building a digital twin? So I think the easiest way to do that is to model, use the concepts of modeling a system. And there are different techniques of modeling a system. You can use different approaches to that. Organizations usually start with one part of their business which probably they think is going to be most critical. You don't have to do the whole thing grounds up to begin with, but do that modeling part of it to start with. Look at the input output parameters, look at the initial starting parameters, look at what is going to change the flow of material or information between the individual parts of the system, and then you start doing that. There are some tools also which are available which helps you to jumpstart that process, and you can kind of create a digital model or a digital replica of a particular system, not necessarily a supply chain, but it could be any system in the organization. So you can start small. Yeah, Shastri.
I think broadly there are three methods that are there for modeling. One is system dynamics, second is discrete event simulation, and third is agent-based modeling. Irrespective of whether you are applying it to supply chain or whether you are looking at how the virus is going to spread. I would urge you to look at these three, and applicability of each of these, be it system dynamics or discrete event or agent-based modeling, is different. Normally in supply chain, you would use either discrete event modeling or system dynamics. And both of them lend themselves for well for supply chain applications.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'm really sorry I had a bit of a technology glitch, but I'm back. So I just want to start by saying thank you very, very much for this very informative and deep dive session. You know, over the last year, many webinars, we've seen many different areas of this whole idea of Atmanirbhar Bharat. We've looked at manufacturing, we've looked at research, we've looked at education, we've looked at energy. One area that we had not yet gone into was the supply chain. And today we looked at how important and how critical it is for India as a country to be able to build these supply chain capability really top notch so that we can be a successful global player. And so we started by looking at a new definition of the supply chain from basically the delivery of things at an appropriate cost to looking at it as a bridge between the organization strategy and the promise of the brand. And somewhere along, we also realized that the supply chain is not just a chain, it is actually a network, because it consists of an ecosystem of organizations that are coming together to deliver whatever the brand promises. And we started by saying that the supply chain management function is no longer a support function and for organizations, and just equally importantly, for India's aspiration, for India's ability to be Atmanirbhar, getting this right is just as critical and strategic. We saw the outcome of PwC's COO survey 2021 and looked at many aspects, but a few of them are what is important and to the COO are things like end-to-end planning, getting closer to the market, and bringing down the carbon footprints. Every one of these has an impact on how the supply chain is managed. Why is supply chain management so critical? And we looked at many different ideas and reasons for that. But I'll just highlight a few that I picked up. Of course, the pandemic has shown us exactly what is required. And we have become more and more aware and more dependent on getting the supply chain absolutely perfect. Geopolitics has played a role. Building resilience and de-risking, and this is an area that Sastry and Sudipta went very deep into. In this context, we saw the role of digital technologies right across the value chain. Things like rapid response, which is visibility at all times. And one other thing that, again, coming back to the idea of why this is important to India, and from an inclusion perspective, what our President Abdul Kalam had called PURA, right? Providing urban amenities in rural areas. And the need to make sure that the last mile is addressed not just in an urban context, but also in the rural context. And obviously, to get all that right, the supply chain has to be managed really, really well. And then when we look at, the supply chain as a way to get closer to the customer, understanding them better, because that is the basis on which you can look at differentiating the organization, not just on the basis of the product, but also on the very delivery process, post-delivery service, etc. Again, all of this hinges upon getting the service, the supply chain absolutely right. They then went on and picked a few areas and dug deep into them. And I'm actually glad you did that, because you could illustrate with examples and really make it come alive for the audience. Some of the key technologies impacting the supply chain are things like sensors, blockchain. None of them is surprising, and we've touched on many of those in our past webinars. So in a sense, this one is helping to get some real life examples of how these technologies are applicable and they impact the common person. It's not just for the techies, but also for every individual. AI and machine learning, cloud, augmented realities, wearables, 3D printing, of course. Then the importance of authentication technologies, and Sastry brought up the example of detecting, say, spurious drugs. The idea of the supply chain control tower was very nicely dealt with. And then looking at the digital technologies, the need to analyze impact of multiple disruptions happening simultaneously. Now, this is something which we've realized is not not the subject of a Hollywood movie, because we are living through it in the last 2 years nightmare that all of us are part of. Simulations obviously are going to be central to this, because that's the only way it is possible to even start to figure out some of this. Because shocks are coming at us unexpectedly, unpredictably, and super suddenly. So if we don't have a good mechanism for prediction, there's no way we're going to be, organizations are going to be able to respond to anything. So that was where the idea of the digital twin of the supply chain came in. And we've seen this idea of digital twins in many other contexts before as well, using synthetic data. The integration of data from many different sources, point of sale, public data, online marketplaces. And even today, we as individuals, when we want to take a decision on something, we end up doing these, physically looking at multiple sources of data. It's pretty much, of course, the same for any organization. It was very interesting to see concepts such as fairness entering corporate conversations. And then, there's some, a good supply chain is the only way to be able to build the circular business model. There's no other way of doing it. So it becomes completely central to that discussion. They also spend time on capabilities, both at the organization level and the individual level. So what we've seen today is a lot of innovation, ideas such as co-opetition, etc., coming in. And these are really shaking up the world of supply chain management. Indian companies actually have an opportunity to gain global leadership if they focus on these ideas right now and take advantage of the experiences that are available globally and in India as well. So with that, I really want to thank you both, Sudipta and Sastry. It was wonderful to be able to again interact with you after many, many years. And as I said, the fact that you could bring alive all of what you said through examples and what happens in the real world was really helpful for all of us. So once again, thank you for making the time to be here. And to our audience, thank you for being here. Thank you for your questions, because that's what helps make the conversations more meaningful. And of course, this webinar will be up on on the IITACB YouTube channel come Monday. And all of our other webinars are all also accessible there. Looking forward to seeing you all 2 weeks from now. Thank you very much and good night.